We'll do a review in Likkutei Sichos in Chelek Yud Tes. This is the fifth Sicha for the Parshas Devarim. This is also a Siyum on Masechta Avodah Zarah. The Rebbe comes up in this Sicha with a gewaldige Chiddush explaining a Gemara in the end of Masechta Avodah Zarah, the Siyum of Avodah Zarah. There's a very interesting story over there as we'll go through inside. The Pashtus, when you learn the Gemara, it seems like the issue had to do over there with non-kosher knife cutting the food, which might have made the food not kosher. The Rebbe learns the issue there was not non-kosher food, but it was the food that was cooked by a goy, which is bishul akum, and the bishul akum also makes the dishes in which it's cooked, makes them osur as well. Because Bechlal, the Rebbe brings down at the beginning of the Sikha, there is two opinions. Normally, when we have a regular Isur, something which is prohibited from the Torah or even with the Rabbanon, but in the normally by the regular Isurim, once the Isur is gets absorbed in the pot or in the dish, that makes it osur as well. The plata becomes osur, that which is expelled is osur. But with regard to gi'ulev, to bishul akum, if we should say that if the whole isur is not that there is something not kosher there, the reason that the item is no good, the problem with the item is that it was being cooked by a goy. So over there's a machloikes whether the isur extends that even what is absorbed in the dish would make the dish the keli treif as well. Can't use that dish until you kasher it, because the bishul akum caused the dish to become treif. And the way the Rebbe learns the Gemara in Masechta Avodah Zarah, that will be a source for the Rav Poskim that hold that the keli is osur as well. But let's look inside and go step by step. And the connection to the Parshas Devarim is because it's sort of a, by the way, limud that we learn out with regards to the giulei, to bishul akum. And it's a kind of smachta from the pasuk, and that's why this whole discussion is connected to the parsha over here. But let's go inside and we'll do step by step. Devarim Hey and the Siyum of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Aleph. Benegeya dem Isur from Bishulei Nochrim, as in relationship with the prohibition of cooked by Goyim, by non-Jews, was melernt of b'derech hasmachta, that is learned in a way that we lean it, it's not clear, from Pasuk, we learn it out from the verse in our Parsha, in which it says, Oichel ba'kesev taz bireni v'ochalti, food you will give me in return for payment, I will pay for the food and then I will eat. And then umayim ba'kesev titan li v'shosisi, and then the water that we will drink will be paid for as well. So there is an equation over here between food and water. So we learn from this that what kind of a food will they eat? Only those food which is equated to water that hasn't been changed, that food that is not, doesn't have to be cooked. If it'll be cooked, then we can't use it. Then we're not going to buy it. When it says there, oichel, that you'll buy food and you'll pay for it and you'll eat it, that's talking about such food that can be eaten as it is without having to go through the process of cooking, because If it has to be cooked, then you can't eat it. That'll be bishul akum. That'll be bishul nochrim. So we learn out ma mayim sheloi nishtanu, just like water has not changed its format. You're drinking the water straight, and you pay for it. Al yidei ha'oir, it does not change through fire, which means you don't have to boil the water. You just drinking it as it is. So the same thing is with the food, that only the food that they say that we're going to eat will be food that has not been changed through fire. So therefore, there's not going to be an issue from bishul nochrim, bishul akum. And this is the asmachta from the pasuk for bishul akum. So but is do aplukta tzvishim poskim. So there is a disagreement amongst the codifiers. See the kelim vasom boileya given in zich pleitas bishulei nochrim veren euch osur. Whether the vessels that have absorbed, they swallowed in them what was expelled from the bishulei nochrim. So you cooked, goy cooked kosher meat in a pot. So the meat expelled and went into the pot. Does the pot become osur? Does it also become osur, prohibited or not? As Zainen do poskim was halten, there are some codifiers. Their view is as vibal that isur fun bishulei nochrim is mishum chasnus. Since what is the prohibition? Why are we not allowed to eat food that has been cooked by a goy? Is because of marriage. The Chachamim were afraid that this closeness of having them cook for us would lead to marriage between a yid and a goy. So they wanted to keep the distance. So they said you can't have a goy cook for you. While this can bring in this can bring to marriage, to intermarrying with the nochris. Hat man nit geasert zeyer pleito. So since the whole isser is because of you might come to for the marriage, the relationship, but the expelling that comes from the meat or from the bishul akum into the pot that wasn't aser. The pleito that was expelled into the pot, that's not been prohibited. Using the language of the Beis Yosef from the other Rishonim, that there is no issue of marriage. You're going to use what? You're going to use a pot in a Jewish home that was cooked bishul akum. How is that going to lead that pot to marriage? It's no longer, it's absorbed in the pot, something that was cooked before. It doesn't seem like that would have the reason why we don't allow bishul akum. That's why they say that it's okay. But das roiva poskim is, but the opinion of majority of the codifier is as oich di kelim zainen osur, that also these vessels are prohibited. And they say the kol sha'osru chachamim litosur kamoyu. Anything that has been prohibited by the rabbis, by the chachamim, that which is expelled is prohibited as the isur itself. Since there is an isur of a goy cooking, and the meat or whatever the goy cooked is asur, it's a kosher meat, kosher food, but the goy's cooking it makes it asur. So then the plate that what comes from that asur food into the pot is prohibited as well. And the Rebbe brings an example from that. We know that on sukkah it has to be schach. It can't be a sukkah which has a panel with which the boards are that are wide for. That would disqualify them from being a kosher sukkah. Schach cannot be made out of boards that are 4 tefachim wide. Now, what happens if you have schach which is 4 tefachim wide, but if you put them sideways, it's only 1 tefach? We say you can't use that board altogether, because once the board has become asur for schach because of its wide side, putting it on its sideway, which does not have 4 tefachim, isn't going to help it. It became like the Gemara says, shputin shel barzel. It becomes like spear is made out of metal. It's already possible. It's possible any way you put it. The Rebbe equates this, and the Rebbe is going to bring down the Ragat Shover, equates this the same in our case. Once there is an isur, if bishul akum becomes asur, it doesn't make a difference. Everything is asur, even when the reason is no longer there. There's no reason of chitun with regards to using a pot that you cook bishul akum in it, but it becomes asur already, and the pot is asur. You have to kasher. V'yesh loymar ados is al derech v'nisorim sherechovam arba. To be similar to planks that are wide 4 tvachim. Was an apostle schach? They're unfit. They're not kosher to use them for schach. Was der din is the halacha is as afilu hafchan al tzidem. Even if you turn them sideways, shein ben arba, and the side doesn't have 4, that is apostle. They're still going to be not good. Kivon the yesh psul aleim, since there is already the name that they're puzzle because of the side that is 4, that is a puzzle b'cholinyan. They are unfit in any way, whether you put them on the wide side, you put them on the narrow side, that is not 4 tvachim, it's still going to be awesome. The Ragat Shover is masbir, as the Ragat Shover explains. As this is by la zachvos is also mitzad gezera, that when you have an item that is prohibited because of a gezera, the reason we don't want to use schach for 4 tvachim, it's like a roof. If a person is going to make a sukkah out of 4 tvachim planks, he's going to go sit in his house because he says this is 4 tvachim. It's too much of a similarity to the house. So there's a gzeira tikra. So the Ragat Shover explains that even a matter which is osur because of a gzeira, suliban ander zachvach is osur, and because something else tikra in your house, of course, that's not qualified as a sechach in your house. So we don't want you to use boards that are 4 tvachim wide, because you might confuse and sit under the roof of your house. When there is a gezeira for one thing because of the other thing, very dezach, so then the things that you're decreeing becomes just like the isur itself. Nit nor when sizdo the tama isur. Not only when the reason for the prohibition is there, the prohibition remains even when there is no reason anymore. Which means if you put them sideways, it's still not going to help. It became an usur on them. So similar as in our case over here, the plata that comes from the bishulei akum, bishulei nochrim, as al piyas der tama isur from bishulei nochrim is mishum chasnos. Although the reasoning why we prohibit to begin with the cooking of a goy is because this might lead to marriage. Vertes ober isur, then it becomes like the isur itself. It becomes isur itself, like any osur dike item that is osur. Ubemeileb like that isur oich when es is nitot der tam, and therefore that prohibition remains even when there is no reason anymore. Chashas chasnas, there's no more worry about marriage. Still, it's going to be prohibited. So that's the 2 opinions. So the 2 opinions is that some say that pleitas from bishulei nochrim does not aser. Majority say it does aser. And the Rebbe says that from the Gemara, the way the Rebbe is going to explain the Gemara in Masechta Avodah Zarah, will be approved to the majority of the poskim that pleitas Bishulei Nochrim is Aser. Yeshleimar, a mocker to the day of the Reva Poskim, a source for the opinion of the majority of the codifier, von dem Sipur was wird gebracht im Simes Avodah Zorah, is the story from the story that is brought at the end of Tractate Avodah Zorah. Bekesher zum Din wie man darf kashern asakin, as it relates to the halacha how one needs to kosher a knife from Giulei Nochrim. Now there, as we're learning right now, till the Rebbe's Chiddush, in Pashtus, we're talking about Giulei Nochrim. There was a knife that is being used over there that became absorbed, that has the Giulei Nochrim non-kosher in it. And over there, the Gemara says, how do you kasher it lechol b'tzoinon, to eat something cold with it? If you're going to kasher a knife and you want to use it for treif or for any kashering of a knife that you want to use, you would have to boil it in water like you normally do. But if you want to just use it for tzoinon, just for cold, so there is an issue with a knife. Number one, if you say to use it cold, if it's a knife that has some grease on it, so one of the ways to remove the grease is what you would do, as the Rebbe brings down, is by sticking it 10 times in the ground, as we see in the story over there. But what it does when you stick it in the ground, that gets rid of any of the grease or any of the attached. That's number one. There's also, if you cut something sharp with that knife, which is asur, and that would need a little bit, it's kidenitila, just to little, because a sharp thing does absorb a small amount, and that's sufficient with the putting it into the ground for eating something which is tzoinim, eating cold. So that's the discussion that we have in the Gemara and Avodah Zorah. Over there, we're talking about sticking a knife 10 times in the ground to eat something cold in the story over there. So the Rebbe says, and if we're going to learn, we're going to interpret, azoy, as the isur from sakin, that the prohibition of this knife is given mitzad b'shulei nochrim, not because giulei nochrim, not because non-kosher, but that knife was used for cooking of goyim, not treif, but it was used for cooked bishul nochrim. That will answer many questions in this story. And the Rebbe brings down the Gemara there, because the Rebbe says that if we're going to learn that the issue at hand was not non-kosher, but rather it was cooked by a goy, that would answer several surprises. So now we're going to go away and discuss the Gemara. The Gemara relates, the Rebbe brings down now the Lashon of the Gemara over there, V'zeloshen Hashas. So there were two Yidden. One was Mar Yehuda, and he was more of a sage, a religious person. And there was another Yid, his name was Bati Bartuvi. And they were invited to Shver Malka. He was the king, a non-Jewish king. They were sitting in front of the king Shver Malka. It was the king invited them. So they bought a esrog before them for a snack, for eating. Posak ocha. So Shver Malka cut a piece with a knife and he ate it. And then Posak v'havle lebati bartuvi. And he cut off another piece and he gave it to the other person to the Bati Bartuvi. After he did that, Hodor, Dotso Asoro Zimni Baro, he stuck it 10 times in the ground. Took the knife and he stuck it 10 times in the ground. And the Gemara explains, the Gemara Zogdor, the Gemara says, Askidei to kasherun asakin, that in order to kosher a knife and to get rid of the attached pieces, or also from the kedenetila, you need to stick it in the ground 10 times. Okay. So after he cut a piece and he gave it to Bati, he stuck the knife 10 times in the ground in order to kasher it, to make it kosher. Hosak, and he cut up another piece of that esrog. Havli Mari Yehuda, and he gave it to Mari Yehuda. So, Amale Bati Bartuvi, so Bati Bartuvi says, Vahu Gavra Lav Bari Yisrael, that man, meaning himself, I'm not Jewish. How come you fed me before you stuck it into the ground? Before you gave Mari Yehuda, you stuck it into the ground to make sure that it's kosher. But when you served me, you didn't stick it into the ground. Am I not Jewish? Amar Lei. So now we have two versions in the Gemara. The first version in the Gemara says, Mar Kimli Begave. This Mar Yehuda, I know him to be a pious, a religious Jew who will not eat unless it's kosher. Umar, but you, sir, I'm not so sure that you only eat kosher, so I didn't bother with you. And we'll see soon. The Rebbe is going to explain everything beautifully over here, what happened over here. And the Rebbe quotes the Rashi. Rashi explained, Rabbi Yehuda makirani boishahu porush. I know Rabbi Yehuda that he is a religious. He separates himself from all non-kosher bad things. He's a porush, and therefore he is not going to eat something which is prohibited. But you, I'm not established, I'm not certain that you're going to be so separate. So from Rashi, the Rebbe will ask this also. So if he's not so sure, why is he giving it to him? But well, let's wait till see all the different issues that we have. That's one version. But there's another version. Ikad Amri. Another people say Omar Lei, that the Shver Malka said, Itcher my avdes biursar. Remember what you did last night. And Rashi explains that derech parsim limser noshim lachsanoim. It was the Persian custom, their tradition. They would give women to the host, to the guests that would stay over. So Shver Malka sent to them the previous night these women. Kibel Bati accepted, but Rabbi Yehuda lo kibel, and Rabbi Yehuda didn't accept it. That's a Rashi. So basically, he's telling him, I know that the first version, he says, I don't know who you are really, if you're religious or not. But in this second version, he tells him, remember what you did last night. You accepted the women that I sent you. And therefore, I wasn't going to kasher the knife before I gave you the piece. All these things, the Rebbe is going to ask all the questions that are almost obvious over here that are difficult to understand. Learning the pashtus. So when you learn in the simple level, is that chilik zwischen the zwei man the omars in them entfer, ushvei malka in them. So what's the difference between the two opinions in the response? What he answered Shver Malka, what he answered Bati, is this. Was Leuten ersten entfer, according to the first answer, what Shver Malka gesagt, Shver Malka said, as is nicht sicher, that he's not sure Sibati is a porush midvar isur, whether he is somebody who separates himself from an isur. He says, I'm not sure about you. The other opinion He's being given avados. Then he was sure as that is nit parush chulu, that he doesn't separate himself from Isur, that he'll eat Isur. Well, itcher my abdes aburta. Remember what you did last night. So the first thing the Rebbe wants to know, the fact was the fact. The Rebbe Shver Malka saw that Bati accepted the night before the offer. So why does he just say, I'm not sure if you're going, if he says, according to the first opinion, he says, I'm not muhzak b'cha. I don't know for sure whether you're going to separate. What do you mean you're not sure? You're sure he's not going to separate, because look what happened. Since Bati accepted these Persian women, and he violated a definite Isur, so why would Shver Malka, according to the first opinion, why did he say, I don't know about you? What I mean, sure he knows. He knows he does Averis. Are you going to say, well, according to the other opinion, maybe this didn't happen? That's not mistaber to make a factual disagreement over here. This must have happened. But for some reason, it did not bring, according to the first opinion, Shver Malka to think for sure that he's going to not separate from the Isur. It's very difficult to say, as the Ikad the Amri is eine mechulik mit erste mandomer, that the second opinion is in disagreement with the first mandomer in a matzis about the fact. In other words, the machloikas is whether it really happened. That according to the second one, according to the first one, he never sent him this woman. Whether what happened in the what you did in the evening, did it happen or then it didn't happen? That's very difficult. So actually, the Rebbe is going to bring down now that actually it may be that there wasn't an Avera for Bati, even if he did accept him. And the Rebbe says that this is actually a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos about whether Bati did an Avera for accepting the Persian woman. Because this Bati, as the Rebbe will bring down from the Gemara, he was left ownerless. He was a slave. A slave that is freed and gets a star shichrur becomes Jewish. But in this case, he did not become Jewish because he did not get a document of shichrur. His owner just made him hefker, gave up. So the monetary connection was basically gone. But he still needed a document of freedom in order to marry a Jewish woman. So he was sort of in limbo. He was in the middle. This Bati wasn't completely evident, wasn't completely Jewish. In his status, the Rebbe brings down from the Gemara in Gittin that there's a machlokes in Rashi in Tosfos, a eved, when he hasn't been fully freed without the get shichrur, is he allowed to live with the shivcha, with a meitzah? Same thing is with a goy, with a nachri, with a Persian woman, whether he's allowed to or not. And the Rebbe brings down that according to Rashi, it's prohibited. According to Tosfos, it's permissible. That's why, according to Tosfos says Bati didn't do an avera because since he did not have a get shichrur, he wasn't freed yet fully, so he had no prohibition against the Persian woman. Gimel. In Tosfos state, in Tosfos it's written, as Bati hot nit heute gewen, der mit was hat mekabel gewen die noshim nechriyos. He did not sin by the fact that he did accept these non-Jewish women. Weil is given an Evet Kitsas. Shema'ukav get shikhr. He was still somewhat of a slave. He still was a slave because he didn't have a document of freedom that gets shikhr. An Eved is mutar be'isha nachris. And an Eved is permissible. It's permissible that isha nachris. And in his status, he was permitted. So Taishu says that Bati did not do an Aveda. But the Rebbe says Rashi does not mention that Bati didn't do an Aveda. So the Rebbe wants to say that according to Rashi, he did do an Aveda because this goes according to the opinion of Lashitose in the Gittin, in which Rashi and Tosfos disagree over there whether a Eved, which is Me'ukav get Shikhr, he was freed, but not completely. He doesn't have a document of freedom yet, whether he's allowed to have marry intimacy with a shivcha or with an ochus. V'yesh loymar, the Rebbe says in the brackets as Rashi was bavorn nit as bati is der mit nit bagangin ken is. So Rashi does not caution us. It does not answer and say bati did not violate a prohibition when he was with the Persian. But Rashi doesn't say that. And Tosfos does say this. That means, according to Rashi, he did violate. According to Tosfos, not. And that is Lishitosayu Azli. They go according to their view by Din, by the halacha funisyaashti miploini avdi. If a person says, I've given up from my slave, this slave, I've given up of him, that is a way of giving up his monetary connection. What about marrying? So it says, Ein li takon elo b'shtar. You can't, there's no correction to what shtar. That's what the Gemara says. So this is Masechta Gittin. So the question becomes, what does it mean he has no correction? So Rashi explains that he's no correction. He can't marry not a Jewish woman because he doesn't have a starship or he doesn't have a document of freedom, but he also can't marry a Jewish woman because he's still he can't Jewish one. He can't marry a shivcha either because he does have a certain degree of freedom, so he's not allowed to. So Rashi says that he's also. Is Rashi mefarish that what means ein takona at all? There's no, he can't marry either one, not a shivcha, not a bas Yisrael. Ein bas Yisrael v'loy b'shivcha. Rashi says he can't even marry a shivcha, even though he's already free. He's out free, but without a get shichrur, without a document freedom, he cannot marry a shivcha. Because he is a little free, so he can't marry anymore a shivcha. Cool. That's what Rashi says there. Aber Tosfos don't learn, but Tosfos over there learns nit Rashi, not as Rashi. Nor ein lo takona b'bas choden koma. He's only not allowed to marry. What the Gemara says ein lo takona doesn't mean both ways. It only means there's no way he can marry a bas choden. That's what the Gemara is saying. Avo b'shivcha shori, he's allowed to have shivcha. So therefore, that is also the difference by us between Rashi and Tosfos about Bati. About derech zeh zoch b'negei Bati. Was is given a meukav get shichr. The Gemara says about him in the and Tosfos bring down over there that he didn't have yet the document of shichr. As ledas Rashi is that also still also b'shivcha. So he wasn't allowed to be with the except for the Shver Malka, the Urta. On the Dasa Tosfos is a mutter b'shivcha, but according to Tosfos, he is permissible with the shivcha and Vaderach Zeh Benochris. He's a lot of shivcha. He could do the same thing with Benochris, no different. So therefore, Tosfos says he didn't do an Aveda, but according to Rashi, he did an Aveda. In any event, Tosfos says that he didn't do an Aveda. Is it move on late Pirushat Tosfos? So according to Tosfos, if he didn't do an Aveda, so what did Shver Malka tell him? Remember what you did the night before? He didn't do anything wrong. If he bald as Bati hot nit overgewen ken isur, since he did not violate any prohibition, if I was him Shver Malka overgeworfen, so why did he bring it up to him and said to him how you don't be so religious. Look what you did last night. So remember what you did last night. You didn't do anything wrong last night because Tosha says that a mukav get shichrur bati would be permissible with a nachri, with a non-Jewish woman. But maybe Shver Malka wasn't such a lamdan, he wasn't such a scholar, and maybe he didn't know the halacha that a meukav gets shichrur, or maybe he didn't know that bati was a meukav gets shichrur. Maybe he didn't know the halacha that a meukav gets shichrur. You don't have a document of freedom. You're not that you're allowed to marry a shifta, like Tosha says, or maybe he didn't know that he didn't have a get shichrur. But the Rebbe says there was a publicized that he didn't have a get shichrur in the Gemara, and Shver Malka was a pretty knowledgeable. The Ritva is masbir. The Ritva explains. Ashver Malka he didn't know of this. Takatosis so that it's permissible. He didn't know that. And that's why he suspected him. Since he wasn't careful of having a relationship with a non-Jewish woman, he's not going to care about Yuli Nochrim as well, non-kosher as well. But v'ze'enei, that's not really true. Eved is Eved Muzar B'chol Yisurim. He's warned all Yisurim, so it did apply to him. And that's why he said later on he wants it. Just as he is asur in eating chazir, the swine or carcasses, he's also asur in the what comes out the plata from the knife that had the giul. He was asur, so, but he didn't know that. He thought that he was choshed him, that he's not careful. But this is not totally smooth, this explanation. First of all, he was an expert. He was proficient in the halachas. This is muchach from der sugya gufa. As you see in the sugya itself, he knows how to stick into the ground and he knows how to answer bati and the gulinochim. So he was pretty knowledgeable. He's nit mistaber, so it's not logical. Azarot nit gewusst dem din as an eved is mutter benochim, that he didn't know this halacha that an eved is permissible benochris. It's not so smooth. As it's schwer zu sagen, it's also difficult to say. Azarot nit gewusst as bati is noch an eved chtzas, that he didn't know that he's still an eved. He thought maybe he's totally free. He's a total yid. Because Rabbi Yehudot wegen der Machris beBarabim, because Rabbi Yehuda publicized it in public in the Gemara and Kedushin over there that he was still an Eved, so he must have known about that. So it's not so smooth that he didn't know to say that he didn't know. So the question is, what was he saying to him? Well, remember what you did last night. The Rebbe has a gewaldige interpretation over here, as we will see later on, because it's all connected to the Geulei, to the Bishul Akum, which is Bishul Chasanas. And if you're allowed to marry her, so what would be Chasanas? We'll see. We'll have to wait. Okay, let's go further. Now there's some more questions that we have on the story in Dalit. In the Prote HaSipur, we also need to understand the details of the story. Bishloima, those was Bati, hat genommen dem Esrik von Shver Malka. The fact that Bati took the Esrik, he cut him a piece and he gave it to him. This is mashma from Sipur, as it seems from the story, because he complained, how come I'm not Jewish? But das gegessen, it seems like he ate it. We can explain why did he eat it. Ados is not the farvos that is given it nizer and giuli nocher. It's not because he wasn't careful eating that was absorbed from goy treif in the knife in there. Oder weil hat nicht gewusst dem Din von giuli nocher. Maybe he didn't know that a knife can become treif. That's not. It's not because he was bottom from Zayin Shaila, because when he says later on, when he complains to Shver Malka, Vahu Gavra Labbar Yisrael, the other person isn't Jewish, is Mubon, as not gewusst, that he knew, and he got him upset that he fed him that. So why did he eat it? It's not because he didn't know, he didn't care. Nor, well, Oiber would nicht gegessen, if he wouldn't eat, the king offered him. Those was der Melech Gittim, that which the king is giving to him. Der mitgewen amedet b'malchus. He would have been rebelling against the government. Und das ist a chashash von pikuach nefesh, and this is a worry he might lose his life. This overrides the whole Torah. We say that a person should violate the Torah and not get killed. So if he's in danger of the king, if the king gives him something to eat, it would have been perhaps rebellious, could cost him his life. He's not, so that's why he ate it. Well, so why is he complaining later on? That's not a problem. He's complaining later. Since he saw that the king already was giving him and he was taking care into consideration his, and he made an issue of it and he put it in the ground and he's careful with that. So he speaks up also. It's understood. That does not contradict. After he saw that he went to Shver Malka and protected Mar Yehuda from an Isur. But they're gefragt. That's why then he asked, is Amai not Jewish? How come he did not protect him also, Bati Bartuvi? But that's not the same as accepting first, because at that point he thought it would be a Merid Malchus. But now that he sees that the king is protecting Mar Yehuda, why not me? So that gives us an answer, an explanation why he would eat it and accept it, because he didn't want to lose his life. It was a question of Merid Malchus, Pekuach Nefesh. As bleibt aber Tamuah mitzad Shver Malka. But it's surprising is Takesh Shver Malka. The bald as Shver Malka nit gewollt machshel sein mit Advar Isur, since Shver Malka did not want to stumble, he didn't want to give Mar Yehuda an Isur. Is Sider far was is, according to both Svaras. First Svara, he wasn't sure, was that is nit given Zicher. The Kimle Bagave, according to the first opinion. He wasn't sure about Bati, whether he's from or not, whether he's careful or not. As Bati is a Porush Midvar Isur, the Bati would separate Dvar Isur. Is those maspik, so not being sure about him, is that sufficient for Shver Malka as Erzol in Bevade Machshel Zain? Yabana Esnan an Isur, that he should give him for sure, stumble him, and to feed him something which is Asur? If you're not sure about it, why give him? Why stumble him? Why not stick in the knife? The Rebbe will ask it in a minute also. A few minutes earlier, and then you'll protect them both. Base. Even according to the other opinion. As Bati had zicher over given an isuburta, that he for sure violated a prohibition in the evening. Now, did he really or not? That depends. According to Rashi or Tosis. According to Rashi, he did. According to Tosis, that didn't even. See, Ba'emes, whether he really violated the Shittas Rashi, because according to Rashi, he was not allowed to be with that person. Or the Nor Das Shver Malka, or only according to the Shver Malka, the Shittas Tosis, that he thought that they're not, for whatever reason, the Ritvo says they made a mistake, whatever reason they had. But, okay. So he violated. Let's say even he violated. Is there doch nit kin tam, that would not be a reason as there's only machshel zan mit noch an isur. Why should he give him another prohibition? Even if he's not careful, why should he give him another Isur? It's possible. As Batio Takanidgi can beistehen the Nesoin Godel, that maybe he could not withstand the great test. The Yitzre da Aveda, the Yitzhahar of doing an Aveda is very strong. Maybe he couldn't resist it. Mit Anochris with the non-Jewish woman. Und von deswegen ist abgehit, Macholos Asuris, and still he's careful not to eat prohibited food. Und befrat, especially as the Isur's Nus mit Anochris, nicht der Chastas. The prohibition against this nus with a non-Jewish woman, not in a married mitzina, in a quiet way, is an issue of the Rabbana. It's only a prohibition of the Rabbana. But treif, what comes from food, is a issue min ha-Torah. That is also min ha-Torah. As we see in the Chumash, about the Muhammad, the Midian, and the Sikha Be'oiga, it's all the halachas of Geulim, Kol Asher Be'esh, Tavidu Be'esh, all in Yonim of Minat Torah. And Gimel to me is noch starker. The question is even greater. Bald as Shver Malkot Saivi Neitz given them Sakim Bekarka. So the Marihuda, since he anyways had to stick in that knife in the ground because of Marihuda. He could have done a few minutes earlier. Before he gave Batim the Esrog. He anyway stuck it in. Why didn't he do it before? And that way he would have protected Batin also from the Isser. Why did he delay? And he only stuck the knife into the ground. After he gave to Bati, then he stuck it into the ground. As Erzol Davke es not Dvar Isur, specifically the Dvar Isur. He's anyways putting it into the ground. Do it before and protect Batin as well. So we have all these questions. And the Rebbe is going to come up with a chiddush over here that it's not about the Geulei Nochrim. It's not about Treif. It's more about the Bishulei. And because Bishulim is because of Chasnus, it's a Choyr Mashasisa Ba'urta, that means that you're allowed to with a Goy, or you did it, as we'll see in details as we explain the beer in Oishei. Oishei. V'yeshloimar der biur bazeh. So we can say the explanation in this. Ubehegdem, by introducing as that Isur funem sakin is given, the prohibition of the knife was nit mitzad di macholas asuris bechlal, not the general prohibited food that was used by the Shver Malko, was erod belay given in bayis fun Shver Malko, that it absorbed, it swallowed up in the house of Shver Malko. Because the Rebbe says it's not logical that they had one knife for cutting the fruit, for the esrog, for the same knife that they used in the kitchen to cook food over there with the pots. Because he was a king. Is there anything lacking in the house of the king? As Hotnit came or zu sagen, it doesn't really fit to say. As oif zu schneiden Peres, that to cut fruit an esrog, hat man genutzt as Sakin, they used a knife mit welchen hat sich benutzt, with which they used for food of cooking, cooked boiling meat. They were using the knife that they caught boiling meat. That's the knife they used for fruit. For sure, there were there for the fruit separate knives. So therefore, it wasn't by those knives that they used to cut the fruit, the whole absorbing of prohibited food. It wasn't next to prohibited food. Nor the sakin is given also mitzad bishulei nochrim. But the knife was prohibited because of cooked by a goy. Mod genutzt dem sakin euch far peres mevusholim. They also used it for cooked fruit, vacharifim, and sharp food. Und hat bei Leia gewend von Bishuli Nochrim. What he absorbed, the knife was from things that were cooked by a goy. He's moving the Reif to Funiko Damri. So now we understand what he comes up, the novelty. The other people said that Shver Malko had gesagt, Idchar my Abdes Beursa. He said to him, remember what you did in the evening. Which means like this. Der Tam Isur from Bishuli Nochrim is Kenal Mishum Chasnos. What is the reason for Bishuli Nochrim so that there should be no intermarriage? B'nai Seyam, with their daughters. The Bald as Batis given Ledasa Toisvis Mutter B'nai Seyam. We'll see soon according to Rashi too, but right now Toisvis. Since according to Toisvis, Bati was permitted B'nai Seyam, is doch by him that Shayich them Isur from Bishuli Nochrim. So it doesn't make sense by him. It doesn't apply the prohibition of cooked by goyim, which is mishum b'nei seyem, which is because of their daughters, and their daughters are not prohibited. Now the Rebbe is going to make a distinction between what he said previous in the Sikha, that something which is also becomes also like the planks that you put on the sukkah, even if you should put them sideways, they're still osur. And the Rebbe says that the leia from the bishul nochrim, even though there is no chasnas in the pot that he's using that absorbed, but still, once it became osur, it's going to be osur. But in this case, the Rebbe argues, when we're talking about that he was permitted with the non-Jew, and there it doesn't apply no Isser. And the Rebbe is going to explain 2 points. Even though that we accept, as we said earlier, Sivalif, as there is from Bishulei Nochrim Vert, that the prohibition of Bishulei Nochrim becomes like the Isser itself. Like any Isser, once it's become Osir B'Drabanan, it's a regular Isser. And that's why he remains osur. Also in a case where the reason for the prohibition becomes nullified, but in our case it doesn't apply. Over here, it doesn't make sense to aser for him not to give him the knife which was beleya from Bishul Akum, if he goes and he's allowed to live with the Nochri as he did the night before. He does need that's not the same in our case. Vorum. So first the Rebbe says in the parentheses, there is a difference when there is an issue that it applies even when the reason is not there. But there are some cases where it never applies in the first place. Not everything that's Bishul Akum becomes Osur. So in this case, if he is permitted to a Goya, to a Nochriya, there is no prohibition against Bishul Akum. The plate is Bishul Akum. Levad Zois. Was there cloud from Nasik Mayetzema Isur? That's what we said. That it becomes like the Ragachover said, that it becomes like the Isur itself. That applies only when we're dealing about an item and a specific object. As since on that item applied the name of the psul, such as the schach, such as the bishul akum, leiptus of irbucholin, and it remains in every case. It's because it already applied. Mashenkin azacha falun by velcher their seichel is mechayiv, as opposed to in those cases where logic dictates, as there isur is melechatchila nitchalev the zach, that the prohibition to begin with doesn't apply to that either. Ayois as der tam isur is bazei kora the din because it to begin with it doesn't apply over there, because the reason of the prohibition to begin with doesn't apply there. So it was never. It's not a psul that remains. It never applies there. As we see in our case itself, as a that there is many situations where that there is no isur. We're not going to say everything that a guy cooks is asur. There's some cases there's no bishul nochrim. The farvas by because over there it said all doesn't apply. That because of marriage is noisef lozeh. So in addition to that, those was that isur bleibt euch wenn sein sibe vetam wird bottle. The fact that the prohibition remains even when the reason is negated, when there's no more reason, main nor that only means as is nitoke cheshash. As the beshuli nochrim can interfere to misur chasnas. That in a case where there is no real worry that the cooked of the goyim will lead to the prohibition against intermarriage, and still we're not going to allow bishul nachrim. Oh, but the etzem isur chasnas is dot faran, but there is a prohibition of intermarriage. We're saying we're not worried that this is going to lead to it. But in our case, by Bati, is doch nitod der isur chasnas. There is no prohibition against marriage. So doesn't really fit to say as be'ez der inyan von chasnas. Same as a dover mutter, that the idea itself of the marriage, their daughters, is something that he's allowed to. But he's allowed to marry. So doch sein osur, still it should be osur those b'shulei nochrim cooked by a goy, but can the fear to chasna might lead to chasnas when the chasnas itself is permissible. So according to Tosfos, he's telling him, remember what you did last night. Basically, what he's saying to him is that it's okay for you. You're not worried about the bishul akum, the geulei from bishul akum. Because the bishul akum, because you're allowed to even marry her. Because look what you did last night, and you were allowed to. That's according to Tosfos that he was allowed to. We can also explain similarly the response of Shver Malka according to the second Ika da Amri. To remind him what you did in the evening according to Rashi. As Bati is given also benochri, that he was prohibited by nochris. Choch is given an evet kitzas, even though he was still somewhat of an evet, but still Rashi's view is that he's still not allowed to marry a nochri. He's not allowed to have intimacy with a nochri. V'bald as there is surpum b'shulei nochri. Is nor to farhiten from what I say, because since the whole reason why cooked by a goy is only to protect from their daughters, Hoter gehalten Shver Malka was of the view as nitokin tam vehechrech so oisiten batin, that there is no reason. We don't have to. We don't have to protect batin from the misyog. So isur b'noiseyim. We don't have to protect them from the b'noiseyim be'es as there is nitomgit in the isur atzmei b'noiseyim. That if he's not careful with the prohibition itself and he has intimacy with them, so what's the point in protecting him later on, chasna, that he might be with them? So this is all because this has to do with the bishul akum that we're dealing with over here. So according to Tosfos, there's no point because he's allowed to. According to Rashi, if you don't care and you do the Avera itself, you live with her, so what's the point of making a Geseda and not to have Bishul Akum, the Geula Bishul Akum? Both. So now, based on this, we can explain, according to the first opinion, he too knew what happened. How come he didn't tell him, remember what you did in the evening? Because, in essence, there wasn't a violation. But the Rebbe is going to bring out that there's two reasons why there is a prohibition of Bishul Akum. One we were talking about the whole time, which is the chasnos, you might intermarry, come to intermarry. Oyser dem tam analef and isu from Bishul Akum, besides the above reason of the reason for the prohibition against the Akum's cooking is Mishum Chasnos is Fran Nochatam. It's another reason. So that just a Yid should not be accustomed to be by him, by the guy eating and drinking. It inevitable, eventually he'll feed him something which is tummy. So just keep them separate. The Rebbe says, V'yesh loymar, we can say, as die zwei man the Omars in the Gemara, these two opinions in the Gemara, seine verbunden mit die zwei Taimim, they are tied to the two reasons. Und sie seine mechuluk, welcher von sie is the Tam Ikri, they are disagreeing which one of these two is the main reason. Leuten Iko da Amri, according to the second opinion, is the Tam Ikri mishum chansnos. The main thing is because of marriage. Und der Fall verrennt wird, that's why when he tells him, remember what you did in the evening, that's an answer why you can have Bishulei Nachrim. It's not going to bother you because you did already. Either because it's not a problem for you, or because if you're having the Aver itself, why should we protect you according to Rashi? We don't have to protect them. According to Toysus, you because it's permissible to the daughters. Rashi, there is Sabinit of Gittin B'nai, and according to Rashi, because you anyways don't careful about B'nai. So there's no point in Bishul Akum. That's because the second answer holds that the main reason is marriage, that you might come to intermarry. But according to the first opinion in the Gemara, is that Tam Ikri, the main reason he holds is so you should not be a regular with the guy eating, and then he'll eat him something tover tummy. So you can't eat the food from a guy. And that worry, that problem, is the Inyan from Abdus Beurta nit can answer the idea what you did at nighttime. So what? That doesn't answer it. So therefore, it doesn't help him, and that's why he doesn't say that. That's why he doesn't. So he says, "But I'm not sure about you." As bleibt doch aber nicht verständig, but what still remains not understood is Kenal, like as before, Leuten ersten man the Omar, according to the first opinion, how come the argument that he says, I'm not sure about you, I don't know you, I know Mar Yehuda, I don't know you, how does that justify to stumble and have Bati eat a Dvar Isur? Why did Shver Malka let him and not protect him according to the first man Omar? Because there's still that problem of Bishul Akum, because the reason is not to hang out with the guy and come to eat with them. And also, it's still not very well understood according to the Ikadamri, according to Rashi's view. Let it be that Bati is not careful with the daughters. Und der Vater ist nicht auch ein Hechrich zu verhitten von dem Sjog zu Bnei Sehem. And that's why there is no necessity. We don't have to protect him from this fence to B'nai of Bishul Akum. We don't have to do that. But as fortgiven besser, but still it would have been better when that is Magdim und Noyitz dem Sakim Bekarka. It should have been still better to first, and before he gave to Bati, he should stick the Sakim in the ground. Before he cut the Esrek for Bati. And there automatically he would prevent from him the Isser. Since it's not tied to any trouble. So we need to still understand it both. How could he stumble him with a Dvar Isur? And how could he not protect him according to the Ikad Amri, even though that he failed with B'nai Seyim that he wasn't allowed to do? Well, why's there a reason? We don't have to protect him, but we could protect him, especially he's sticking in. Why does he do it before? The Rebbe comes up with another chiddush over here, he's saying that this whole sticking in the knife 10 times for a king is a disrespect. It's not something that a king should really do. He only does it in a case of a necessity, but other than that, the king shouldn't do that, and therefore he didn't do it when it was because he knew that Bati is not so medagdik, but only with Rabbi Yehuda, who knew he was not going to eat it under no circumstances, even if it's pekuach nefesh. That's why he had to do it before him. Is the bir in them Zion? Is the bir in the explanation of this? The din is as a parnish in ismana latzibur. We're talking about even a person of a position that has been appointed over the community to over the affairs of the community. Cannot do work in front of people seeing him. For sure, a king is not allowed to do work in front of people. Although Shver Malka was a goy, is the halacha amilsa b'taima. This halacha has a reason for it. Was is bishlei musay, which in its wholesomeness, oich by a nochri, also by a goy, ubefrat the nochri banagosi b'atzmei, especially a goy and himself. He runs by this logical conclusion. This is alluding that what? So on his own, we are obligated to honor the kings of the nation of the world. So this is something which requires respect. Why takel we chayiv that? As covered the melech is azar is negated to yeshuva shalom. To honor the king is a matter which is related to settlement of the world. If not, as the Mishnah says, had it not been for the fear of the government, one man would swallow the other one alive, and therefore was Bnei Noach sein and euch mitzuvoiv them. Bnei Noach are also commanded to honor the kingdom, and therefore the obligation to honor the kings also applies to Yidden. So, in any event, Yidden are obligated to honor the Goyim. So, therefore, doing work and for a king in front of the people is not something respectful. So it turns out, as mitzat kovid melech, because the honor of the king, hot shver malka nid getort, wasn't allowed, no yed zayin dem sakim bekarka, to stick the knife in the ground. Bati Bar Yehuda, in front of Bati Bar Yehuda. Vibald as when Bati as them esrik. And since when Bati eats the esrik, Oich only eats a bekarka, also without sticking in the ground. He would not be violating an isur because he has to listen, even according to talking about to the second. Like even according to Rashi, according to the second day, he has to eat it. So there would be no problem for him to eat it because there is a worry of nefesh. So the Farat Mishver Malka, he must give them Esrik, on to know sein free them Sakim Bekarka. That's why he had to give him the Esrik without sticking the knife first in the Karka, because he couldn't disrespect himself. And there was no reason. But when it came to Mar Yehuda, so now we can explain the explanation for Malka was given them sakin the karka davke for Mar Yehuda, why he stuck the knife for the karka for Mar Yehuda. Val Mar Kimle Begavei, he knew about him. Their mitot and nitkimein. I know him. It doesn't mean that he's a religious man. I know that even under the threat of pikuach nefesh, he's still not going to eat. The mitot and nitkimein. It didn't mean as benegei Mar Yehuda is a zicher as vet nit essen adover isur. He knows that he's not going to eat. He's sure that he's not going to eat something prohibited. Benegei batin is bemasofik, and he's not sure about batin. Nor kimli begavei. I know for sure as Mar Yehuda that b'shum eifun it has nam esrik. Under no circumstance will he not eat the esrik. Afal piazer megessen minadin. Even though he would be allowed to eat it, afil when dos is verbunden mit bekuach nefoshes, he's not going to eat it anyways, even though it's tied to bekuach nefesh. So what he's trying to say here is not that I know he's a religious Jew, that he doesn't eat the surim, but he wants to say, I know he's not going to eat it, even though he has a right to eat it because of Pikuach Nefesh, but he's still not going to eat it, and that's why, at that point, he stuck the knife into the ground. Especially if you're going to say, Yehuda, even though it says here Mar Yehuda, but this is talking really about the Rabbi Yehuda. Because the Gemara says about him, as is given from the Kamoyi, he was from the earlier one, was Havikomasri Nafshayu Agadushas Hashem. He would, in modern brachas, that he would give his life over for the sanctity of Hashem's name. And the Rebbe brings down the order, it says, Mar Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, it could still be the same. Even in a case when you're not obligated, as the Rebbe brings down from the Forshim. So now we had to stick it into the ground. By Bati, that he's not sure, that is Mesupik. He's not sure. Nitzer is Bechlal Porush from the Surim Chaz v'Shalom. Not saying that he's not sure if he's part of Surim, and that's why he's going to give him another Isur. That wouldn't make sense. Nor Belois, whether he's going to give up his life of them. But Shver Malka al Smelech, so he as king need getort mevater sein. He wasn't allowed to forego of sein kovet on his honor, Tom farin the melocha from Itzis Sakin Bekarka, and to do sticking the knife into the ground. Now, why about getting somebody else to do it for him? I noticed in one of the notes that the Rebbe brings down over here, and the Rebbe explains also. So how come he gave in the note 50? How come he gave first to Bati before Mar Yehuda? First of all, he should have honored Mar Yehuda first, and that way he would not be stumbling Bati. And then sticking the knife in the ground would not be for Bati, would not be against the covenant of the king, because he wanted to learn from his conduct, the halacha, that because of Bati, he's not allowed to be Mavater on his covenant. And maybe that's also the answer. I thought I saw it in a note over here. But that's also the answer why he couldn't get somebody else to do it for him. He was a king. He didn't need to do it somebody else, because this is more than just, he wanted to teach the halacha that cannot be mevater on his covet when it's not sure. It's because he thinks that the person is not going to violate because he's pikuach nefesh. From them sipur chesva men eichayro in avedus Hashem. From this story, we also have a lesson in the service of Hashem. Dover der Tzel, here we're relating as far as Shver Malka, seine Gesessen zwei Menschen. There was two people sitting in front of him. Was einen given mechuyev in Kavod HaMelech. They were obligated to honor the king. Einer von sie is given in Shrek for dem Yiddish Melech. One of them was scared for the non-Jewish king. Und der Vater hat gegessen von dem Pri. And that's why he ate from the fruit, was Shver Malka hat geschnitten mit Nitkin Kosher und Sakin, that Shver Malka cut with a non-kosher knife. He found an allowance. He found a heter. Because of Pikuach Nefesh, etc. Und der Eid hat bei Melech nicht gehabt, kein Geherigen Kovet. That person, the king didn't honor him, didn't respect him really. That's why he gave him the pri. The zweiter was by Shver Malka's given Kimle Begave. The other one, who by Shver Malka was certain by him, as wird nicht over sein kein Isur, that he will not violate a prohibition. Afile wenn das Rirton Kovet HaMelech, even when it touches the honor of the king, this Mesiras Nefesh, he's going to even give up his life not to violate an Isur. Davke Derid specifically was that Yid, but nit belois nit verloren dem Chaim by Melech. Not only did he not lose his grace in the eyes of the king, but Adarabe, on the contrary, Shver Malka Allein hat mevater given of sein Koved HaMalchus, Shver Malka himself. Oh, I said before, the Rebbe says this in the Sikha himself. I remembered it from the Sikha, but I thought it was a no. Okay. So Malka hat mevater given of sein Koved HaMalchus, und sich allein materiell given zu Meshamish sein Mar Yehuda, and he himself troubled himself to serve Mar Yehuda. The Lechaira hat doch gekannt da reinrufen einem von dem Meshar Samelech und im Hesen Neuet sein dem Sack in Bekarka. He could have called in one of the servants of the king and asked him to stick the knife in the ground. Oder Afila sagen Mar Yehuda allein das zu tun. Could have told Mar Yehuda to do it himself. When a guy sees in front of him a Jew, who says a Yerushalayim, a fear of heaven, which stays away from prohibition until he's ready to give up his life. Then the non-Jew thinks this as an honor. He's the honor of the king. To pen him, but didn't him to be able to serve him. Not just to serve him, but him not geben and help him, but to give in and help him by himself. In alle hidurim, in all the perfection, your most perfect way. Now, as Alpidinot Mar Yehuda gemerkt essen the Esrog. According to Halacha, Mar Yehuda was allowed to eat the Esrog, only eats a sack in Bekarka without sticking the knife in the ground. Durch der Anhoge, with such an Anhoge of Sidas Nefesh, not to do an Isur. Werder Sim from Avodah Zorah. That concludes the tractate of Avodah Zorah. Is mevatel the vinyan from Avodah Zorah ba'ilum. We negate and destroy the idea of Avodah Zorah in the world. And as vert ois Hashem hamlucha, the kingdom will be to Hashem b'chol oilum kula in the whole world. Hoy Hashem the melech al kol haaretz, because mamash Hashem will be a king over the whole world very soon. This is Mesichas Yutas Kislev Tavshin Lamed Aleph.